and welcome to another Easter-based GryphonArt demonstration. And today we're going to be making a slightly bigger treat or gift box. And this one will easily take 3 standard-sized candle votives or a large bar of soap with plenty of room to spare. So that's the size gift box that we're dealing with. Now this box does belong to my A5 milk carton series of boxes. So we're going to be starting out with a standard sheet of A5 cardstock, which is 8 1/4 inches by 5 3/4 inches or thereabouts, and we're going to be scoring on the wrong side of that card. So using those A5 milk carton score lines, we're going to start by scoring at the 2-inch mark. We're going to miss the 4 and the 6 and then score again at 8 inches. We can then turn our card anti-clockwise as we would for our A5 milk carton and just score for the top of our box at 3/8 of an inch and then at 1 7/8 of an inch and 4 5/8 of an inch for the baseline of our box. We then turn the card clockwise and we're just going to score that 1 inch mark in that first panel just down to that 3/8 of an inch score line. And at that point we can get rid of our scoring board. I'm now going to flip my card to my right side, so this is the right side of the outside of my box, and I'm going to put in those final diagonal score lines that will allow the front and back of our box to come together easily to close it. Now if you have used your self-heal mat for scoring the previous set of score lines, you may not be able to see the lines on the right side of your card. So if that's the case, just fold and crease that set of lines first and you'll be able to see where you need to be making these lines in turn. So that's all my score lines finished, so I can just set about to fold and crease those next. And as I generally remind you, it's just a case of making sure that your fold lines are lining up with your score lines just to ensure that your box is square. It's best not to use the side of your card to do that because your card may not be square. So I just put these last little ones in. And that's my cardstock ready to go. I now just need to remove this little bit of surplus cardstock at the end, which is not necessary for my box. So we'll get rid of that, and I'm just going to cut from the bottom of my box up to that first score line to create the flaps for the bottom of my box. Now you do need 2 pieces of cardstock folded exactly the same, and I've already done that to save some time, so you can see that absolutely exactly the same, a duplicate method of scoring a second piece of A5 card. And that then puts us in a position where we can join these together so that we then have the 4 sides of our box. So that's the next thing that we need to be doing. Now I'm just going to use some double-sided tape for that, so I'll quickly put that in place. Just to prepare for that. And I do like to do a dry run just to make sure that all those score lines are square. Yeah, and that's fine. So I'm going to just remove the backing tape from my double-sided tape, and this one is going over the edge slightly, so I'm going to just fold that back on itself so it sticks on itself, and that stops that stickiness inside the box itself, so not something you'd really want. There we go, that's fine. So we just line this up. And as always, you're just really concerned with the main body of the box, because if you get that in place, the rest will fall into place. And I'll just then use my bone folder to apply some pressure to that so that we get a good join. So that's basically our box ready for assembly. But this particular box design that we're looking at today does have a number of quite flat embellishments that we can apply, and it is actually going to be easier to apply pressure to these when the box is in its flat state, not assembled. So that's what we're going to look at next, and in particular I'm going to have a look at these chicks. So I'm going to be using these little chicks that I've prepared earlier, and I've just cut those out using a Cottage Cutz die cutter, which is the thin metal style die cutter. And I will leave all the information relating to that in the description area for this video in case you want to source those for yourself. I have actually also coloured those in using Tim Holtz distressing, and if you're interested in reproducing them as they look here, then I have created a separate tutorial that covers that process. So if you want to have a go at that, I'll again leave a link to that tutorial in the description area for you. So the first thing that we want to do is string these together like bunting. So I'm going to be using some thread to do that. That's Gutermann thread, but it is their upholstery thread, which is much more heavy duty than the standard sew-all thread. If you're looking for an alternative, I would say something like string is probably going to be a bit too bulky. So if you can find something fine, maybe even wire might work, but it just doesn't want to be as bulky as a thick twine or string. Now I am going to be cutting a length of this. I hope that you can see it. That's spanning from there to here. So I'm going to cut quite a long length so that I know I've got plenty to work with. In fact, I can give you an idea of exactly how long that is. Yep, that's just over 16 inches that I've cut off there. And the first thing I'm going to do is to decide if there's any difference between any of my chicks. That one's beak's slightly different. I'll stick him in the middle. So I'm now going to just flip him over, and to start with I'm going to put just a small piece of double-sided tape, not very big at all, just across the middle of his back. I'll show you in a minute. I've just put it there where it's going to span across his shoulders, which is where that string or thread is going to go, and it's just going to give me some adhesion there. So I can then find, well, actually if I take the backing off that to start with, put him on there where you can see him a bit better. So I'm then going to find roughly the centre of this piece of thread. So that's roughly where it is. And I'm going to lay that across the middle of that double-sided tape. So I've got some adhesion. It's not that secure, but I've got some adhesion. And that means that I know that that thread is now crossing through those shoulders. Oh, I think I just pulled that off. Better do it again. Right, So it's at least giving it some form of holding that in place. I can then take a slightly larger piece of tape and just holding that taut across the shoulders there, I can use that second piece to get a much better adhesion across the shoulders. I hope you can see that. That's where we're positioning that thread. So I'm just going to run through the second one. Now I am going to use my self-heal mat for this because it's easier to line things up. What I tend to do, and you'll find your own way, is I get those shoulders on one of these horizontal lines and I put the other chick by his side and line him up with that at that shoulder point the same way. And actually, although it may seem that these chicks are spaced quite a distance apart, put that underneath, it needs to go on top. In reality, their wingtips are only about 1/8 of an inch. So it looks a lot further here, but that's only because they're on this curve and that separates their wings out a bit. If you were using this embellishment for a wider box, you could perhaps spread them apart a bit more, but for this 6-inch width, to allow a nice area of frame, you want to keep them quite close together. So if I do the same thing, we'll put a little bit of double-sided tape on first, just in the middle, roughly in the area that it needs to be. I can keep him lined up, keep the wing tips about 1/8 of an inch apart, and then I can pull that thread taut and make sure that it's sticking to my second chick. At that point, I can again take another longer piece of double-sided tape and apply that more easily over the top. So we've now got 2 chicks, if I can show you, side by side on our, they twizzle a bit, and you can see how when they go and curve, those wings spread out a bit. So I'm going to now, just for the sake of time, I'll apply my 3rd chick using the same method, and then I'll come back to you at that point. So I've now got my 3 little chicks all in a row stuck to that thread. And the first thing I'm going to do is concern myself with this middle chick because I need to get him positioned centrally and on the bottom here. And he's going to be spaced just about, maybe just over or just under 2/8 of an inch from the bottom. I can show you that on there. So I am going to use my eye to a certain extent, but I'm going to place my ruler across the front of my box in order that I can see this middle 3-inch marker point. So that will more readily enable me to make sure that that chick is positioned centrally. So by using that, all I'm going to do now is to apply some PVA glue to the back of my chick, particularly these little feet, because you do want to make sure that they are stuck down, because if something so fragile isn't stuck down, it could get caught and, you know, break, and you don't really want that. So I do like to make sure I've got plenty of glue on the feet. I'm just going to spread that about a bit, make sure I've got plenty there. Don't want to drop him at this point onto my box, but just take up any excess. You want enough glue, but you don't really want it to be oozing everywhere either, so it's a question of that balance. So once I'm happy with the amount of glue that's remaining, that it's going to stick my chick down well, I can remove the backing from that double-sided tape. And then I can hold on to him just by simply holding onto that thread. And you do want to make sure when you're doing this that the thread, if you haven't got full adhesion across that wingspan, that the thread is in place across those shoulders. So I can just look to see where I want him to be placed, his feet to be placed at the bottom. Make sure that that little feathery bit on his head is about at the 3-inch point. And then once I'm certain of that, I can apply some pressure to glue him down. Perhaps use my bone folder a little bit. Now, I do want that glue to be well and truly dried before I start messing around with my other 2 chicks, which will potentially pull on him a little bit. So I'm going to let that glue go off, and whilst that's happening, I can turn my attention to some of my other embellishments. So I've got these embellishments on the ends of my box as well, which again, they're flat, so I can apply them at this stage. Now, these are just leaves. In fact, both the leaves used, so this leaf and this little leaf here, which will come across later, are both taken from this Spellbinders Shapeabilities die cutter. Again, it's this flat style metal die, and I'll put the details for this one as well in the description area, so you'll be able to see exactly what that is. So I've got 4 of these leaves, and I need 1 for either end of my box. And what I've done, because I tend to make quite a lot of boxes and positioning can be quite critical for me, I have made 2 templates. Now I've made 2 because surprisingly, and I was surprised, this leaf is not actually totally symmetrical. So had it been, I could have just used that template on one side of the box and flipped it to the other side, but that doesn't work. So I've created a right and a left template for my leaves, and this is going to help me to position those embellishments. So the template size is the 2-inch width by the 2 3/4 inch width, and I've just die cut my shape centrally in order that I can then use that cutout for positioning my embellishment. So I'll just apply some glue at this stage and we can see how that works. It takes a bit of time, but actually if you're making a lot of the same box, or even, you see, this embellishment could be used on any box that has an end panel or a side panel that's 2 inches by 2 3/4 inches. So as long as you keep these little template guides or embellishment guides in a safe place, they can come into use again, and it does make life a heck of a lot easier than trying to work it out every time you want to put an embellishment in place. So I'm just going to make sure that I've lined up that template on that end panel. I can put that into that space, press it home, and then just lift the guide from behind it, and at that point I can apply some pressure. So it really is quick. There's no need to try and gauge anything. So I can do the same this side. Just applying some glue there. Sorry, I went off camera for a little bit there, so you wouldn't have had a clue what I was doing. But right, so again, we're just going to line this up on that end panel, pop that into the space, Once that's through, just remove the guide and your template's positioned. So this second little chap can now be glued into place. So I'm going to do him quickly on camera for you. Now, unfortunately, he is now attached to my box by the other chick, so I can't bring it up to the camera for you, but it's the same principle in terms of gluing. And I just want to show you how I'm lining him up with the other chick and on the box, because I think that will be helpful. And the third chick I'll do off camera to save some time. Let's get plenty of glue up there. Okay, so I'm going to remove that double-sided tape. Now, in order to ensure that these are lined up fairly well balanced on either side of this middle chick, if you take your thread to this corner here, so it passes through, you can then place your chick accordingly, and he's going to be, you know, line up these wingtips a little, and he's going to be on a nice curve. And when you come to do that this side, because you're going to that opposite corner, you can do a similar thing. So that way you're going to get your chicks nice and evenly spaced. So I'm just going to get him stuck down, and you can do these one after the other, because you know this chick is now stopping this one from pulling this one, so you know they can be done one after the other. Once you've got your middle chick in place, you're ready to roll, really. So make sure he's nice and stuck down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly show you how I do this central embellishment on the neck of the box. So I'm going to show you how I position this one, and I'll just do one of those for you, and I'll show you how I position this little leaf, and then I'll finish off camera so that I'm not taking up too much of your time, and then I can come back to you thereafter. So if I just get one of these other leaves, and what I do is I use my ruler again, because I'm looking for that central position. I haven't created a template in this instance, but I can see that's my 3-inch point. So I can place my the tip of my leaf, as long as I've got it spaced evenly top and bottom, I can see where to position that. So we'll quickly pop some glue on there to get that one in place. I'm using PVA, by the way. I tend to use quite a lot of that in combination with double-sided tape, and sometimes Yoo-hoo, it just depends. Those tend to be my 3 adhesions of choice, but it's because I'm used to them. And if you've got glues yourself that you're very comfortable with, then obviously you can use what you're happy with. So we've got our adhesion on the back of that. Just put my ruler along that top edge so I can see that 3-inch central section. It's not going to be exact, but I can see roughly where that needs to be. And that's then enabled me to get that embellishment in place. And of course, having done that, I'll just line this one up using that tip, preferably the right way around, and so I'll be able to put that one in place. So that's that sorted. Now for these tiny little leaves, which are both the same, one will be placed that way and then the other one the other way, as you'll see later. So I'm just going to stick the leaf in place approximately there, and that will then get covered with a little cold porcelain flower. So I'll put a bit of glue on that. Fiddly these are, but they will have a little bit more adhesion because of the flower that gets stuck on top of them. So I have a tendency to drop them. There we go. Right, so this one is just going up this way, so I'll just pull that out again using that thread into the corner so I can see roughly where I want it to be. And then I'm just leaving a little gap above that fold line, so it's just a question of positioning that where you want it. And then the cold porcelain flower will go over the top. So that's how that's going to work. So I'll get this chick stuck down, I'll get this embellishment stuck down and this side to the same stage, and then I'll come back to you at that point. So that's now all our flat embellishments attached to our box. So I can now trim back this excess thread on either side that is not required. So I'll just quickly do that. And the next thing we're going to be looking at is our closure, because we can also attach that whilst our box is in its flat stage. Now I'm going to be using a ribbon and button closure for this, and it basically consists of two parts, and I'll show you the back briefly first. So it's really a strip of card that's the width of our box and 3/8 of an inch, which is this depth here. And all I've done is I put a decorative piece of ribbon along the center of it and sewn two buttons on, one at either end, and in this case it's then a 1/2 inch in from the end of the strip on either side. I've then layered another strip, and actually in this case it's another 2 strips on the back of that first strip in order to give this strip some strength. Now exactly the same principle has been applied to the front part of that closure, so it's almost the same. The only difference is that the decorative ribbon in this case is just going over the ends of the strip, and this ribbon that's dangly is actually one continuous piece. So it starts here, goes behind the button and across the front, and ends at this end. So that's the difference. Now if you are interested in that closure and there's not enough information for you, I have a detailed tutorial on this ribbon and button closure available for you, and once again I will leave that link for you in the description area for this particular video so that you've got quick access to that. So what we'll do, I'm just going to apply one side of this closure on camera, because you know the same technique is used for front and back, and I'll do the back because it's probably easier to do on camera because I haven't got the dangly bits to deal with. So the closure in both cases, either front or back, are positioned along the width of the box at the top, and I stick them on so that they just rest on that fold line there. So that's where we're going to stick that onto our box. Now the only thing to bear in mind is that once it's sitting on that fold line, it does sit proud of the top of the box, and for that reason I apply my adhesion to the box rather than the closure, otherwise you're going to end up with the glue on here and it will be visible. So I'll just get on and do that. I'm going to use PVA glue. Generous amount. So I'll just get that onto the ends. Try and make sure you can see. And that should give that fairly good adhesion. Right, so now I'm just going to take my closing section and rest that across, in this case, the back of the box. The only thing to bear in mind is that the extra dangly bits of ribbon belong on the front part of the closure that's attach to the front of your box. So that's the only difference. So I'm then going to use my bone folder to just apply some pressure, particularly at these ends, because there's quite a lot of bulk with the ribbon being folded under that end, and the bulk from sewing the button on, that sort of thing. So it's good to just make sure that these ends in particular are attached well to the box. It's quite good actually, because you can, with a bone folder, you can get underneath those buttons, and so it's quite good to apply the pressure there. Alright, so that's the back of our closure. I'm going to do the front exactly the same way at the front of our box, and there's no right or wrong way in terms of being upside down, so they're symmetrical. So I will attach that to the front of the box, and then I'll come back to that stage and we'll be ready to assemble. Right, so those closures are now nicely in place, and you've probably noticed that I've already put all my double-sided tape on my box ready for assembly, just in the interest of time. So I ordinarily like my front flap to be the last flap to go down, so my double-sided tape goes on the outside of my box in all cases except for my front flap. And with these front flaps, because there's actually not too much overlap when you come to put the box together, just be mindful of that. I find it advisable to keep whatever form of adhesion you're using to the edge of the flap in both cases, just so that there's no stickiness left on the inside of your box. So we'll go ahead now and do that last bit of assembly very much in the way that we did the central join earlier. So I do like to do that dry run, particularly on the main body section of the box, to make sure that everything's lining up nice and squarely. So once we've ascertained that, you can remove the backing and the double-sided tape. And actually, in this case, again, that double-sided tape is slightly wider than that flap, so I'm just going to fold it back on itself so that I don't get that stickiness on the inside of my box. There we go. And then I can just sort out, as I said before, just concern yourself with the main body of the box. It's much easier just to work with that shorter length. And once you've got that lined up, move those beads out of the way. Then the rest of the box side tends to just fall into place. And you can use some pressure, apply some pressure to that. Now, it's for this reason, you do need to be able to get it quite flat, and for this reason it's fine to put flat embellishments on your back, on your box prior to assembly, but you wouldn't really want lumpiness like this to be on your box. It would make assembly a little more difficult. So there's no right or wrong, there rarely is, but that's my advice. Anything bulky, wait until your box is assembled. So that's the side sorted. We're now going to set about these ends. And you can see that you can put plenty of adhesion on these end flaps because they're going to get covered up. So just get rid of the double-sided tape backing as quickly as possible. Sometimes it can be stubborn. That's one end finished. So I know that the back flap comes down first. My front flap is the last one down. So I'm just going to square up these ends one at a time and let that double-sided tape take a position and grab the long flap at the back. So at that point it's just a case of removing the rest of the backing from the double-sided tape. Oops, almost lost it, and there we go. And then you can square the box up again. And once you've got to that stage, just flip the box over, use a ruler or bone folder or something just to apply additional pressure from the inside, just to make sure that it's got maximum adhesion. And there we have our box assembled. We can now turn our attention to this last lot of embellishment. So we've got a cold porcelain flower just to place on the front of our box here. Now incidentally, I do make these cold porcelain flowers myself, and again there is a separate tutorial that shows you how to go about doing that if that's of interest to you. If you don't have these sorts of flowers, you can use other forms of embellishment. Buttons would work here. You know, there are alternatives which I'm sure you can easily bring to mind to replace these. So because I know that the cold porcelain that I make has a huge amount of PVA glue in it, I'm fairly happy that PVA glue is going to bond well with any cold porcelain. So that's what I'm using for the adhesion in this case. So I'm just going to drop that into position. And that really is then just a case of letting that cold porcelain go off, letting the PVA go off. You need to use a fair amount with these little cold porcelain flowers, and it does take a while to dry. So once they're positioned, it's best just to leave the box to stand for a little while, just until the flowers are secure. So that's all our embellishments sorted. Now what I'm going to do, I can't really close that box off for you until I know that PVA glue is dry behind those cold porcelain flowers. So I'm going to turn the recording off for a moment, and then once I'm happy that's dry, I'll come back to you and show you how that closure works. Right, so I think that's probably secure enough now for me to demonstrate that closure for you. So I think you can see that that's quite a good firm closure. It's got quite a lot of strength to it, and that's because of the layers of that card. Now you could just do a figure of 8, and that's absolutely fine. For whatever reason, I like to use this method, and the first thing I do is take that ribbon from the front around the end of the box, because I think that helps to clamp those two sections of card together. I then take the ribbon underneath. I wonder if I can do this so you can see it. I take this ribbon underneath that button at the back. So it's gone round the end of the box, underneath the button at the back. Then I take it straight over the top and underneath the button at the front. I then go round that button and up and across, so it's almost like a figure of 8 at this stage, and round the back of that button at the back. And at this stage I do a complete revolution of that button, so any remainder can then just be left to dangle. Okay, so if we do that again at this side, so from the front, bring the ribbon round the end of the box and underneath the first button at the back, just underneath, up the side so that you can go over the top of the box and underneath the button at the front. Then cross over at the top and do a full resolution of the button at the back. So that then means that these dangly parts are hanging further into the centre of the box rather than at the side. But it doesn't matter, you know, you'll find your own way. But that's basically our Easter box with ribbon and button closure. Now, as always, I do like to show you different colourways because these boxes can look quite different in different colourways. So this is our turquoise, navy and white one. You've seen the green and gold one in this as we've been working through, so I've used the contrast leaves in that case. But I've also done another green one here, but in this case I have not used a contrast for the leaves. These particular leaves at the top here, I have used a darker green here, but I've used just the same colour to give more of an embossed effect. So that's perhaps something that might have appeal. And then finally, I've got this really quite zingy purple version with these gingham contrast leaves. So that's our Easter box. And all that remains now really is for me to say thank you very much for taking the time, as always, for watching one of my tutorials. It is appreciated.